Imagine a day where you can simulate a world so perfectly that you can recreate every single neurosynaptic thought you could have, but now you're in the simulation on the computer.
Is reality all just one big simulation? Well, some big names like Neil deGrasse Tyson, Elon Musk, and many more think it's a very possible that we are. So let's get into it. Neil deGrasse Tyson, one of the most charismatic scientists since Bill Nye. He thinks that there's a very good chance we could be living in a simulation. In fact, he thinks it's about a 50-50 chance. All of this could be one big simulation sitting on someone's hard drive. When Tyson was asked about us possibly living in a simulation of some kind, he said, quote, "I think the likelihood may be very high." Then he noted the massive gap between human and chimpanzee intelligence, despite how much DNA we share with each other. 98%, just so you know. So in the vastness of space, there could be some other beings far, far more superior to us in every conceivable way. Tyson went on to say we would be drooling, blithering idiots in their presence. If that's the case, it is easy for me to imagine that everything in our lives is just a creation of some other entity for their entertainment. A lot of the popularity about the whole "are we living in a simulation" thing came not only from the Matrix, of course, but from Nick Bostrom, a philosopher at the University of Oxford in 2003. He came out with a theory that what we perceive as reality might actually be a sophisticated computer simulation created by an advanced civilization. He based his theory on three possibilities, one of which must be true. Either human civilizations never reach a stage where they can create such simulations because they either go extinct or choose not to. Advanced civilizations are not interested in creating simulations of their ancestors' lives. And the third is that we are almost certainly living in a simulation. See, Bostrom argues that if the first two options are not true, then the third must be. Because if any advanced civilizations are capable of creating simulations and are interested in doing so, the number of simulated realities would far outnumber the one originally created. So the probability that we are living in the real world is very low. To make it simpler, think about it like this. Let's say you have one real world and millions of simulated ones. If you randomly found yourself in one of these worlds, the chances are incredibly high that you're in one of the simulations rather than the one real world. People often liken this idea to video games. Just as characters in a game might believe their world is real, Bostrom suggests that our reality could be created by beings with technology far beyond our own, and we wouldn't necessarily know it. Next up, we have Elon Musk. A man so incredibly smart, yet so incredibly dumb at the same time. It's weird. Anyway, we're not here to talk about Elon Musk himself really, but his theory on a simulated world. Let's get into that. The CEO of SpaceX and Tesla himself really believes that we are indeed living in a simulation. He's talked about this on the Joe Rogan podcast and press conferences, and unlike the other folks on this list who just theorize about it and think it could be a possibility, Musk is like 99.9% sure, stating that there's a quote 1 in a billion chance we're in based reality. So just a little less on the fence than Neil deGrasse Tyson, for example. Max Tegmark is a physicist at MIT who's written a couple papers on simulation theory, one in 2014 entitled "Is the Universe a Simulation?" and another that came out just a couple years ago called "Detecting Structures in Universe Simulations," which he wrote along with postdoctoral researcher at the University of Copenhagen, Hans Olaf Kold. Max Tegmark believes that our universe can all be broken down mathematically, and that even reality itself is part of a mathematical structure. Now, he outlined this in his 2014 book, Our Mathematical Universe. So Tegmark thinks that these mathematical structures could essentially be similar to the type of code we see used in, say, video games. A simulation. In Tegmark's own words, if I were a character in a computer game, I would also discover eventually that the rules seemed completely rigid and mathematical. Next up, we have James Gates, who spoke at the Isaac Asimov Memorial Debate along with Max Tegmark, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and others. Gates is a theoretical physicist at the University of Maryland, and he made similar discoveries as Max Tegmark did. He stated, "I was driven to error-correcting codes. They're what make browsers work. So why were they in the equations I was studying about quarks and electrons and supersymmetry? This brought me to the stark realization that I could no longer say people like Max are crazy. So we've discussed a lot of theories and stuff from scientists, but how about strange first-hand experiences? This story comes to us from Reddit user JenL729. When I was about 4 or 5 years old, my father's uncle passed away. My father was going to the wake, but my mother was working, so he needed to bring me with him. I had never been to a wake or a funeral before, and I do believe this was my first ever experience with death. We arrived at the funeral home and I followed him through the procession of family members. Then we approached the open casket. I don't recall being afraid. Curious and bewildered would be better terms to describe the feelings, I think. I do know that there was absolutely no sense of fear at that point. We stepped away from the casket and I stood by my father as he chatted with family members. I needed to use the restroom, and it was just around the corner, so he told me to go and come right back. I turned to the corner, used the restroom/sink, then exited the bathroom. When I came out and turned the corner, the room was empty and there was no casket. My father was gone, and so were all the other people that were there only a moment ago. I fearfully began wandering around the funeral home, but not a person could be found. The entire building was silent and empty. Finally, as I neared the front entrance of the building and was going to step outside, an employee approached me from the alcove on the right where they kept the coats to see if I was okay. I don't remember any of the conversation, but they turned me around and directed me back to the bathroom. When I came out of the bathroom, everything had returned to normal. Now, that person was very young. It's a very old memory they had, so finicky, but interesting story. So, is there any way to actually test whether or not we're living in a simulation? Well, not at the moment, but there are a team of scientists led by Martin Savage that have been working on it, and he believes that one day computers will be advanced enough to determine it. Martin Savage and his team had been attempting to actually simulate a universe inside a computer. Now, that hasn't been accomplished yet, but it could be a possibility in the future. Martin J. Savage is a physics professor at the University of Washington who thinks our universe might be a giant computer simulation run by our ancestors. He and his colleagues started looking for specific patterns in the universe that also appear in smaller computer simulations we create today. One pattern he used as an example is the limitations in the energy of cosmic rays. If our universe were a simulation, these cosmic rays might not behave as expected because of the resource constraints of whatever's running the simulation. That one's hard to wrap your head around. But this next glitch in the Matrix story comes to us from Reddit user JBBJ84 and goes as follows. The one thing that has continued to make me question my reality is a dream I had back in 8th grade about my girlfriend who was going to break up with me. I dreamt that she was sitting in a room with her best friend discussing whether she would break up with me or not. I distinctly remember the point she made about being too young and whatever. It was a long time ago, but I do remember that after waking up from that dream, the reasons she had for breaking up with me were ingrained in my brain. For some reason, when I woke up after this dream, I had a weird feeling that I was gonna receive some bad news. Lo and behold, I checked my phone and there's a massive text message from my then girlfriend explaining why we should break up, with the exact same reasoning as I witnessed in the dream I had. Even weirder is that I found out the friend I had seen in my dream was actually with my ex when she sent the message. It was the weirdest effing thing I've ever experienced. It was completely out of the blue, and I didn't expect the breakup text at all before the dream. Now, after I've read about simulation theory, the thought can't stop popping into my mind that somehow I was able to visualize the next part of this game tree, that I unexpectedly was able to view what was going to happen next. It still bugs me today and gives me existential anxiety because I still don't have a plausible explanation as to why I had such a specific dream that actually ended up coming true. David Chalmers is a well-known philosopher who focuses on the nature of consciousness, looking into why and how physical processes in the brain give us the feeling of being conscious. Chalmers is also interested in the idea that we might be living in a computer simulation. Now, Chalmers really makes the whole simulation thing seem less scary than it sounds. He has a much more chill view on it in general. One of Chalmers' key points is that if we are living in a simulation, it wouldn't necessarily change our everyday experiences or the fact that we have minds and are conscious. He thinks that even if our world is just some sophisticated simulation, it would still be real to us. Our feelings, thoughts, experiences, it'd still be genuine, even if the actual reality is different from what we see it as. So he looks at more the philosophical side rather than the scientific details. He's interested in how a scenario like this would impact our understanding of reality and consciousness. Finally though, we have a story again from Reddit user RespectRemarkable294 with a post entitled, "I was never there before." She writes, "I had never in my life been to Universal, but when I was planning our dual vacation at Disney and Universal, my kids kept asking me what rides were at Disney because I had been there before, and I told them every single ride and every detail that I could remember. The Mummy, Men in Black, The Simpsons, you get the picture. Only to realize not one of them are Disney rides. My explanation, well, maybe Disney used to own them. I know, stupid, but whatever gets me through the day. We go on our trip and go to Men in Black, and we're waiting in line, and I tell my husband everything that's gonna happen right before it's happening. It's like I remembered a script. Same thing is happening on all the other rides. However, it doesn't happen on the newer ones, like Harry Potter rides, etc. I called my mom and asked her again if we'd ever been there when we were young, and again she told me no. I am 38 years old. I would have definitely remembered, but I keep asking. It just feels wrong, and I feel like I'm being lied to. I also know for a fact that I never have been to Universal, and I've never been on these rides prior. I never watched videos either. I hate having rides ruined with them."
Have you ever felt like reality is off? Like something isn't quite right in the world around us? Well, get ready to question everything you thought you knew. In this video, we are diving deep into the simulation theory and uncovering 10 chilling clues that suggest our existence might be nothing more than lines of code in a hyper-realistic computer program. Starting off, we are talking about the argument of high probability. Some philosophers, like Nick Bostrom, have cooked up a theory that feels like it can't be real, but it is actually taken quite seriously by some scientists. They say there's a high chance that we are living in a simulation. Bostrom argues that one of these three scenarios is probably true. First, that extinction is the norm. Almost all civilizations out there, like ours, never make it past a certain point. They wipe themselves out or get destroyed before they can really get advanced technology. It's a little bit terrifying, right? Imagine countless civilizations reaching the brink of greatness only to fall into the abyss of extinction. It's like cosmic Russian roulette. The second scenario is that no one's playing games. The advanced civilizations that do make it decide running simulations of their past, like their own version of super advanced ancestry.com, is boring or pointless. So they don't bother creating these massive virtual worlds to see what their ancestors were like. The third scenario is that this is all make-believe. Definitely the scariest of the scenarios, that we are actually living in a giant computer game right now. That our entire universe with its stars, planets, and morning coffee is just some super advanced alien software running on a cosmic computer. So why is this unsettling? Well, if we're in a simulation, then who's controlling it? What happens if they decide to hit the off switch? It's like being a character in someone else's video game, and it makes you wonder, are our choices really our own, or are we just following the pre-written code of some cosmic programmer? This theory gives a whole new meaning to the question, what is reality? And honestly, it's a little bit spooky when you really think about it. Next, we are talking about the second law of infodynamics. So a physicist studying the mutations of the SARS-CoV-2 virus has stirred up quite the conversation with claims that hint we might be living in a simulated universe. Dr. Melvin Vopson, the scientist behind these claims, introduces, quote, the second law of infodynamics, suggesting that mutations in the virus aren't random but follow this new law. He's found that information entropy, a measure of disorder from an information perspective, decreases over over time in these mutations, opposing what we see with typical entropy, which increases. This discovery is more than just a quirky observation. Vopson argues it could flip our understanding of evolution on its head and even hint at a universe that's more orderly and deterministic than we thought. He connects this to the idea that the universe might be a giant simulation, designed with data optimization to minimize computational needs. In his studies, particularly with the ever-mutating SARS-CoV-2, Vopson has observed patterns that he believes can't be dismissed as random. He suggests that if we start viewing genetic mutations deterministically, we could potentially predict mutations before they happen, which could revolutionize genetic therapies and vaccine development. However, the physics community is still skeptical, and more research is needed to test these very bold ideas. Vopson's theory, while intriguing, remains on the fringe, and proving it might involve experiments that check if information itself has mass, a concept that could tie back to everything from the heat death of the universe to why symmetry is so common in nature. So while the second law of infodynamics opens up fascinating possibilities, it is a long road from hypothesis to accepted science, especially with claims this big. But who knows? Sometimes the strangest ideas lead to the most profound discoveries. Next, we are talking about the limitations in the laws of physics. So think about the speed of light. Nothing can go faster, right? It's like the universe has a top speed limit, and no matter what you do, you can't break it. This reminds some people of a video game, where the game can only process things so fast, so it sets limits to keep everything running smoothly. Then there's the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, a weird rule in quantum mechanics that says you can't know both the position and the speed of a tiny particle at the same time. It's as if the universe saves on processing power by not deciding where something is until it absolutely has to, kind of like a game that only loads the parts of the world you're looking at to save memory. These rules of physics might make you wonder if they're just programming constraints in a giant cosmic simulation set up to keep things manageable for whatever's running the show. Isn't it a bit like we're living in a cleverly crafted game where certain things are off limits to prevent the whole system from crashing? It's definitely a wild thought, but it sure makes you look at those science class lessons a little bit differently. Next, we are talking about the observer effect. So have you ever heard of the downright bizarre behavior of particles in the quantum world? In quantum mechanics, things get really weird because particles, like electrons, don't settle on a specific location or path until we actually check up on them. Kind of like they're all potential and no decision until observed. This quirkiness is known as quantum indeterminacy and the observer effect. So now think about how video games work. Alright, it's just the easiest parallel, so there's going to be a lot of video game talk. They don't bother rendering every single part of the game world all at once. Instead, they only show you what's in your current view to save on the processing power. It's like the game is saying, why bother with the rest if you're not even looking there? This is eerily similar to what's happening at the quantum level. It's as if our universe is running a super efficient simulation, doing calculations only when necessary to make sure it doesn't waste any resources. This parallel makes some folks wonder if maybe, just maybe, we're living in some sort of cosmic video game where things aren't fully decided until they need to be. Next, we are talking about mathematical consistencies. Have you ever noticed how everything in the universe seems to follow a specific set of rules, almost like it's all part of a gigantic mathematical equation? Pretty wild when you actually think about it, from the way the planets orbit the sun to how your coffee spreads out when you spill it. There's math everywhere. This isn't just a coincidence. The universe is actually incredibly consistent and can be described really well using mathematical principles, just like a computer program. This consistency is what gets some people thinking. Maybe our universe is a bit like a game or a simulation. I mean, really just think about it. In video games, everything from the graphics to the physics is governed by code, by math. So when scientists find that even the most chaotic and complex systems in our universe can still still be nailed down with equations, it makes you wonder if there's some sort of computational foundation underneath it all. So why is this exciting? Well, it suggests that maybe our whole universe could be running on a vast cosmic computer with every star, planet, and galaxy following a set of mathematical instructions. It's like the universe is a giant puzzle and math is the key to unlocking its secrets. I feel like that's a nightmare for a lot of us. Like, oh no, not math. The one thing I can't understand. I actually like math. Well, I guess we all have to. Next, we are talking about the anomalies in the cosmic microwave background. So for this one, we are taking a look at the universe's oldest light. That is the cosmic microwave background, also known as the CMB. This is like the universe's baby picture taken shortly after the Big Bang. Now, this light should be pretty uniform, but scientists have noticed some weird patterns and anomalies in it. It's as if the universe has a slight glitch or a kind of a cosmic watermark showing up in this ancient glow. Some folks think these odd patterns might be like the digital artifacts you see in images that have been compressed too much, or when your video game starts showing weird lines because of a graphics bug. What's super intriguing is that these anomalies could hint at a digital grid or a kind of underlying scaffold to space-time, sort of like how pixels build up your screen. If our universe were a simulation, you might expect to see some clues at the largest scales, and these odd patterns in the CMB are like potential Easter eggs left by the universe's programmers. Next, we are talking about Gödel's incompleteness theorems. So these theorems are like the ultimate brain teasers of the math world. They tell us that if you have a robust enough system of math, the kind you could use to describe, say, the entire universe, there are always going to be some puzzles you can't solve, no matter how hard you try. It's like having a never-ending list of riddles where some just don't have an answer. Now, think about a computer simulation. Even the most powerful video game or simulation has its limits. There are certain things that it just can't compute or display. Gödel's theorems suggest something similar about our universe. There might be cosmic rules that are kind of like a computer's programming constraints. These unprovable truths could mean we're in a giant cosmic simulation where some things are set up just so the system can keep running without crashing. It's a mind-bending idea that maybe some of the mysteries in the universe are unsolvable because they're built into the code of our reality. Next, we are talking about the bootstrap paradox, which in physics is like a cosmic chicken or the egg scenario that really twists your brain. Imagine you write a story where a scientist receives a mysterious notebook from the future filled with ideas that they then publish. Where did the original idea come from? Similarly, in physics, we have laws that could potentially explain how entire universes, including one like ours, might be created. It's as if the universe could contain the recipe for making more universes, including itself. This kind of mind-bending, self-creating loop is like a video game where characters discover they can design and spawn new levels or even new games from within the game they're already playing. It suggests our universe could be just one level in an epic cosmic game, constantly spawning new universes in a never-ending cycle. So next time you're pondering the mysteries of the cosmos, consider that maybe we're in a universe that's bootstrapping itself into existence. Next, we are talking about the black hole information paradox. Imagine you toss your favorite book into a black hole, a bit dramatic, I know. According to the rules of quantum mechanics, the information in that book should be preserved somewhere, somehow, because in the quantum world, information never really disappears. But black holes, these cosmic vacuum cleaners, seem to suck everything in and let nothing out, not even light, which makes it look like the information just vanishes from the universe. This dilemma is what scientists call the black hole information paradox. Now here's where things get really sci-fi. Some smart folks think this paradox could be a clue that we are living in a cosmic hologram. They suggest that all the information swallowed by the black hole might actually be stored on its surface, kind kind of like how your phone stores stuff in the cloud. I'm still trying to figure out what the cloud is. This idea is part of the holographic principle, which hints that our entire 3D universe might be a projection from a 2D boundary. This very mind-bending concept fits nicely with the simulation hypothesis, suggesting that what we experience as three-dimensional could be just another level of grand cosmic simulation. And finally on our list today, we are talking about tampering with the experiment. So imagine if we found out for sure that our whole life is just a massive computer game and everything we've just spoken about is in fact true. Now that's what Professor Preston Green from Nanyang Technological University in Singapore is thinking about. He's pretty worried that if our scientists ever manage to prove that we're living in a simulation, it could cause a huge mess. So here's the deal. According to Green, if we start running experiments and suddenly figure out that yes, we are indeed a simulation, this could really mess up the whole point of why we're being simulated in the first place. Green suggests that if we get too nosy and prove that we're just bits of data in a cosmic computer, the beings running this show might just hit the off switch. Why? Well, because if we know we're in a simulation, then we'll probably change our behavior so much that the simulation stops being useful for whatever questions our creators are trying to answer about their own world. So, while it's fun and kind of weird to think about being in a giant video game, Green warns that proving it could lead to game over for all of us. So just be careful, you know? They have questions for us, buddy, I got questions for them, okay?
So if the universe we're living in is really as expansive as it appears to be, why do we seem to be alone? Now, this is assuming, of course, you don't believe we've already made contact with aliens. I can go either way on this. I find some of the stories pretty convincing, but I've never actually seen a UFO or an alien myself. For the purpose of this point, let's just say the government is not keeping aliens hidden away in some underground lab somewhere. So if not, then where the hell are they? For all the transmissions and probes we've sent out into space, you'd think we'd have made some form of contact by now. All your friends are just other humans. I don't know if you've noticed, unless you're pets, you got pets, maybe those could be your friends, but yeah, I mean, there's no Klingons or Wookiees anywhere to be seen. So the point is, maybe we haven't made contact with anything because space really isn't as massive as it appears to be. Nothing is, because none of this is really here. It's just a highly advanced simulation with only enough RAM to render one advanced civilization at a time. Or maybe everything we see is technically here, but it's all been artificially created by some advanced being that we have no way of contacting.
It is possible that a team of scientists conducted an experiment that found proof that we are living in a simulated universe. Back in 2017, these scientists at the University of Washington totally shook up the scientific world when they proved that they could sneak computer code into real human DNA. If you're like me, you're probably wondering why on earth they would need to ever do that, and the answer is to expose a vulnerability in gene sequencing computers. But by showing that our biological building blocks could be hacked, just like computer code, they may have accidentally opened up Pandora's box. By showing that our DNA can be hacked like a computer code, they may have shown something that is straight out of the Matrix. Maybe what we thought was our biological reality is actually just zeros. It's basically like finding out that we're living in a super advanced simulation where DNA isn't just the stuff of life, it's the stuff of code.
Next up, we have the climate simulation theory. So some have speculated that our world might actually be a giant simulation in order to test out how to deal with a global crisis like climate change, for example. First, there's the idea that our civilization is headed towards big trouble because of climate change. We're messing with the environment with all, the pollution and stuff. And if we keep going like this, it could lead to some serious problems like floods, droughts, and all sorts of other bad stuff. Now, some folks think that maybe all this chaos is happening because we're actually part of a simulation, that maybe some super advanced beings created our world as a simulation to see how we deal with a big energy crisis or world-ending issue. I mean, it would make sense. If we had the ability ourselves to create a virtual world within a computer to test out how to deal with various problems, we totally would. So maybe that's exactly what's happening right now, and we just don't know it.
what if a teeny tiny little measurement is what breaks the simulation? Enter the Planck length. This super small measurement is like the Lego brick of the universe. At this small of a scale, even our own physics, like the concepts of gravity and space-time, aren't really quite sure what to do, and the rules no longer apply. This is exactly what has simulation enthusiasts wondering, could this little measurement be the simulation's way of showing that it is in fact just that? A simulation. Each Planck length is a single pixel, one bit of information. Could this be the blueprints to the Matrix?
How do you explain all the unexplained things people have been claiming to experience since pretty much the dawn of time? That's a bizarre sentence. Doors slamming on their own, phantom footsteps, apparitions. Well, people will either say it was a ghost, and then non-believers scoff. But they don't really have much of an explanation of their own other than some form of your brain was playing some sort of trick on you. Is that really the best explanation that we can come up with though? That we're just hearing or seeing things that aren't really there? Maybe there's a meatier explanation, something with a little more substance. Maybe paranormal experiences are actually glitches in the Matrix. Those translucent figures people have seen in old buildings wearing old Victorian era clothing could be the computer just glitching, showing a brief flash of something that's already happened. Same thing with the phantom sounds like footsteps or laughter or fart. Why do we never hear ghost farts? You know what I mean? It's always footsteps, laughter, creepy stuff, but it's never anything funny.
Next, I'm gonna hit you with a bit of an Uno reverse here. Nuclear physicist Zore Davuti serves up a mind-bending idea. Cosmic rays, those cosmic cannonballs of energy, could hold the key to unlocking the truth behind the simulation theory. In a simulated universe, these rays might look like chunky pixels on an old school video game screen, while in the real deal, they'd stretch out like never-ending spaghetti strands. But here's the real kicker. Even if we found these pixelated particles, there's no guarantee we're not just caught up in some super advanced version of The Sims. What I mean by this is summed up perfectly by NYU philosopher David Chalmers. Quote, "You're not going to get proof that we're not in a simulation because any evidence that we get could be simulated. Proving we're not in a simulation is like trying to catch fog with a net. Any evidence we could dig up could be part of the simulation itself, leaving us scratching our heads. So next time you feel like reality's playing tricks on you, just remember, it might be because we're all just pixels in someone else's reality."
Alright, this next one is pretty trippy. It has to do with some bizarre behavior seen in electrons. There's a famous physics experiment called the double slit experiment. Scientists shoot tiny particles, electrons, through two slits in a barrier, and the expectation is that you'll see this wave-like pattern on a screen behind it. But when scientists actually watch as these electrons go through the slits, suddenly the pattern on the screen changes. It's not wave-like anymore. The electrons end up behaving more like particles. So why does this happen? We're still not sure, but some people cite this as possible evidence that we might be living in a simulation. Maybe the so-called program running our simulated world conserves resources and only shows us certain things when we're actually paying attention to them.
You know the classic children's tale of Goldilocks, where she's always looking for the thing that's not too hot, not too cold, but just right? I swear I'm not going crazy, this is just the best way to describe the position of our planet Earth. Scientists have dubbed our place in the universe as the Goldilocks zone, where we are the perfect distance away from our sun so that it's not too hot where humans wouldn't be able to live, and it's not too cold where all our water is frozen, and so are we. Here's where the simulation twist comes in. How likely is it that we were placed here just because we had a stroke of good luck? If you were designing a reality, you would of course want to put your characters in a place where they are the most likely to survive. That doesn't mean that you still don't do crazy stuff like take the ladder out of the pool or conveniently forget to put doors in the house, but it's just a way to give the characters a baseline to thrive.
Here's a bit of a different take on this whole thing, but still very valid. Our perception of reality is just flawed. In a way, we're all kind of living in our own little simulations, interpreting all the information that's thrown at us with our own flawed human senses and emotions. We all kind of live in our own world, don't we? Our perception of reality is based on our past memories and experiences, our upbringing, our own personal abilities to interpret information. It's based on all kinds of things, and sometimes our perception ends up lining up with other people's, but in all kinds of other ways it doesn't. Just ask your ex who said what to who. This is why eyewitness testimony is often one of the least credible types of evidence in court, and even when it comes to stuff that's right in front of us, we never really all agree. Remember the dress that was clearly white and gold? Actually, did you think it was white and gold or blue and black?
It's blue and black.
Blue, really?
Yeah.
Oh my God, Chris? Damn, all right, so I'm the only one in the room, damn. All right, I thought it was white and gold. That's what I think. For some reason though, other people say blue and black. In reality though, it's pretty much split down the middle. If you ask most people, it'll be pretty 50-50, and that's kind of nuts. So if something as simple as a photograph like that can be this like divisive, not hard to imagine why it's so tough to wrap our heads around reality itself.
Also, that will be James' last video. I will not have any white and gold truthers over here. Imagine a team of scientists that come together with powerful computers and a ton of curiosity, and they all start to recreate the entire universe, but in digital form. Well, that actually happened in 2014. The brilliant people at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics pulled off a mind-bending feat when they linked up 8,000 computers to create a huge simulation of our universe that stretched 350 million light years across. They didn't stop here, but they ended up hitting fast forward and aging the universe 13 billion years, I guess, just to see what awaits us. They could basically see the entire universe from the Big Bang to the present day all on a computer screen. This all goes to show that not only are we interested in creating simulations, but we're also pretty good at them, and we're only getting better. And if we can create our own simulations, what's to say that we aren't living in a super advanced civilization's simulation? And hey, if you need further proof that we're suckers for simulations, just look at the wildly popular video game franchise, The Sims. With over 125 million copies sold in its first decade alone, it's clear that we humans have a knack for playing with virtual worlds. So when you think about it, if future generations of humanity have the chops to whip up even more realistic simulations, it wouldn't be a shocker if they decided to dive headfirst into the digital sandbox of existence. Who knows? Maybe we're just characters in someone else's video game. Cue the existential crisis.
The Hoover Dam, okay, this massive accomplishment. Its first victim, sadly, was a man named J.G. Tierney. It was December 20th, 1922, and the official death toll from industrial accidents during the construction of the dam from 1921 to 1935 was sadly around the 200 number. It was a lot of deaths, it was pretty sad. The earliest and latest victims of the construction were both father and son. And if that's not coincidence enough, both of them died on the exact same day. They both passed on December 20th. J.G. Tierney sadly drowned while conducting surveys in the Colorado River, and then 13 years later, Patrick Tierney fell off an intake tower right before construction was complete. Grim start, but stay tuned, we have a lot more. Number 9, legendary musical neighbors. It's weird how similar some of your neighbors are, right? Like growing up, we had 3 Davids on our street. They all loved cutting their lawn at 7 a.m. What a coincidence, right? We all hated them. What a coincidence. Well, the 60s rock icon Jimi Hendrix and the 18th century composer George Friedrich Handel, they were both neighbors. A couple hundred years apart, but they were both neighbors indeed. They lived in 23 Brook Street and 25 Brook Street in London. What are the odds, right? Had George been born 200 years later, we would have gotten the greatest collab of all time. Yeah, if you're local, of course you'll know there's a site there now. It's a famous landmark, but in terms of coincidences, there's music in the air on Brook Street. Something's going on. Kinda wanna walk by and see if I'm better at playing the flute. Maybe I can play the flute on that block, who knows. Number 8, same taxi, different tragedy. Okay, here's a dark one, buckle up folks, pun intended. Back in 1975, a man was sadly hit by a taxi in Bermuda. Now he of course sadly did not make it, all the while a passenger in the taxi witnessed the entire horrible event. Now that's life-changing in itself, that's trauma, right? A year later though, the same driver was driving the same passenger when all of a sudden, the taxi hits another civilian. That civilian just happened to be the initial victim's brother. Ugh, horrible. This is some Final Destination stuff. I don't like it at all. Like this What are the odds here, really? Let's move on to something a bit nicer, a bit. Number 7, same day, different vows. Okay, brightening up the mood a little bit, bringing us all back to happy land. CBC News reported this one. It's a little nicer of an ending. Fred and Lynette Dubendorf, husband and wife, they were taking a stroll down the beach with their dog, living up the life, right? The classic. When they noticed a message in a bottle had washed up on the shore. Now, personally, I wouldn't be too excited, right? I'd be a little concerned. I've seen Castaway, you know? This message could go one of two ways. I have no idea. Like, what's gonna be in here, right? Like, help, 1876, you're like, oh no. But they opened it, and inside they found wedding vows from another couple, Melody Kloska and Matt Bears. They had recently got married on a beach in Lake Michigan, and word spread rather quickly. Thing is, their wedding date was the same as the couple who found the message. That was the bizarre coincidence here. So they took it as a sign that both pairs were meant to be, and they sent a surprising letter to the lost couple's address. It's kind of nice, but it's also kind of creepy, you know? It'd be creepy on one hand. Hey, I found that message in a bottle. Cool, nice address, lovely home. Cool, I'll be back in a bit. Hope it works out. Who puts their address on a message? That's just asking for disaster. Number 6, $1 marriage. The story of Esther and Paul Gratchen. Okay, this one goes out to all the single folks out there, okay? Keep hanging on. Love's coming, it's out there. See, Paul had decided on asking Esther to marry him, and around the same time, he caught himself about to spend a $1 bill on a sandwich. But the dollar bill randomly had the name Esther on it. Okay, so he framed it. Obviously, this was a bizarre coincidence, and Paul recognized this. And when he showed Esther later, she was speechless, right? She loved it, but she didn't tell Paul her side of the story until after they tied the knot. See, much earlier, when Esther and a group of friends were all going through a breakup, they wrote their names on a dollar bill and said, whoever brings this bill back to them, they'll marry that man. Now, Esther didn't tell Paul the full story until after they got married because, well, she was worried this coincidence would have scared him away. Yeah, more than fair. Hey, I have a dollar bill and it's your name on it, so we have to get married now. You're like, what? Bye. Number 5, Civil War coincidence. There's another war coincidence in this list, but I saved that for number 1 because it's too good. But this one here is also pretty insane. The Civil War began in 1861 with the first Battle of Bull Run. The Bull Run is a stream that passes through the farm of a 46-year-old Wilmer McLean. Passes through his farm, right? The Bull Run is a stream that passes through the farm of a 46-year-old Wilmer McLean. This property was in Virginia. Now, of course, once the dust settled, the property was destroyed, so McLean left his home with his wife, and for nearly 4 years, the pair were considered safe while the war was otherwise changing history. Then in 1865, the war came to a close when Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at the Appomattox Courthouse, which at the time was literally steps away from McLean's new property. Yeah, he saw the beginning and the end of the Civil War by accident. He saw it front row too. What are the odds? Number 4, George D. Bryson. Back in the 50s, this story was spread all over Kentucky. Back in the 50s in Louisville, a man named George D. Bryson was checking into a hotel room. Now he walked up and asked if there was any mail for him, which on one hand is an excellent bit. I'm gonna do that next time I go to a hotel for sure. Hey, got any mail? Classic, because you're just visiting them one time. There's no way there's gonna be mail. That's the joke, right? Except this time, there was. This time the hotel manager said yes, and there was in fact mail from the previous occupant of the room, who had also had the same name, George D. Bryson. Yeah, what are the odds, right? I remember one time I met another McWaters, and he was not related to me, and he also was not thrilled that we had the same name at all. It was the most bizarre thing. I was like, hey, can we talk about this? He's like, yeah, cool. I'm like, are you my brother? I don't want you to be anymore. Get out of here. Then I got Kyle, and I was like, you know what? Change your name. Now you're my new brother. Replace this guy. Number 3, Yanni and Laurel. Before we wrap up this curious list, we have to throw a fun recent one in as well. Remember this Yanni Laurel thing back in 2018? I only heard Yanni for like 2 weeks straight. I heard Yanni. That's it. For 2 weeks, guaranteed. I was determined that it was Yanni, okay? And then one day I listened and it was Laurel, and then I couldn't go back. It was just Laurel all of a sudden. Like, it immediately just changed. It was a completely different word. I felt sick. I was like, is this real life? How is this happening? This got everybody talking. What is this phenomenon that happens? Same with the dress mishap. What is going on? Well, many believe these viral illusions are proof that we're living in a simulation. Yeah, these arguments, you know, the dress is blue, no it's white, these situations prove that we perceive reality in our own individual way. Everybody is living an individual perceived reality, so sometimes it doesn't always align. Sometimes we hear what we want to hear. Sometimes we hear Yanni, and then sometimes we hear Laurel, and it's completely different for some reason. I can't go back now, it's the worst. God, I hated this so much. The dress was back in 2015, then Yanni Laurel was 2018. I don't know, we're due for another glitch in the matrix any day now. I come back next week, I have a different first name all of a sudden, you're like, what? Number 2, miss unsinkable. It's one thing to narrowly miss a natural disaster or a massive accident, But to not miss a tragedy 3 times in a row, that sounds like a curse if you ask me. That's for sure a curse. Violet Jessup, this brave soul, survived 3 major ship disasters in history. She was born in 1887 in Argentina, and Jessup contracted tuberculosis at a young age and wasn't expected to live longer than a few months. She beat those odds and lived a healthy, relatively long life, which is shocking considering what I'm about to tell you. Violet, first of all, had a hard time getting hired as a stewardess on a ship because her youth and good looks were feared to distract crew and passengers. Yeah, you're too good looking to work on our ship. Welcome to the 1900s, I guess. Eventually, she got hired in 1910 to work aboard the HMS Olympic. Now, a year later, the Olympic collided with HMS Hawk, and the ship barely made it to shore. It was a tragedy. It was a huge disaster. Violet then served as a nurse aboard the Britannic right before World War I. The ship then collided with a German mine, and Violet jumped overboard and somehow survived with a fractured skull in the water and swam to safety. Afterwards, Violet worked on the Titanic, and on April 14th, 1912, she escaped another disaster on lifeboat 16. I mean, like, the odds that you survive 3 times in a row is one thing, but to experience 3 of those in a row? And finally, number 1. World War I soldiers. We have to finish on a grim note because this one is one of the most bizarre, in my opinion. When the First World War ended, the amount of British lives lost were around 1 million souls. The first reported casualty of World War I was a soldier named John Parr. And then after a countless number of lives were lost, the last soldier to die was a man named George Edwin Ellison. Now, both heroes' resting places are both in the St. Symphorian Military Cemetery, and they just happen to be 15 feet apart. And of course, this was not planned, nor were any of the entries on our list. It's just another bizarre coincidence that was discovered after the fact.
The Mandela effect. The Mandela effect began being widely recognized when people began to swear that they could remember Nelson Mandela passing away in the 1980s. This is of course weird since he actually passed away in 2013. This is obviously a huge time discrepancy, so people were very confused. This is of course how it got the name the Mandela effect, and it basically is the theory that whoever is responsible for this simulation we live in has gone back and changed some things. There is an alternate belief that the Mandela effect shows that there are multiple universes or alternate realities, and this is just a result of us crossing from one to another. Other really famous cases of the Mandela effect are the Bernstein Bears, where some people swear it used to be spelled with the ending being S-T-E-I-N, while all copies are now spelled S-T-A-I-N. Or the popular peanut butter brand called Jif, there are people who swear it used to be called Jiffy. This one, however, is my personal favorite. There are people who remember there being a movie called Shazam where Sinbad played a genie. A lot of people speculate, though, that they are just getting it mixed up with a movie where Shaq played a genie called Kazam. I definitely remember the Bernstein Bears one and the Shazam one, so I just might be a believer that this all really is a simulation.
At number 9, aliens. Over the years, we've spent billions of dollars trying to get to outer space and trying to find signs of extraterrestrial life or any past lives on other planets. Despite all of our best efforts, we haven't been able to find any aliens. This theory goes that the reason we haven't been able to find aliens is either because they're the ones running the simulation in the first place, or it's possible that if they are part of the simulation, they may be more advanced than us and have possibly found a way to escape. It's also possible that maybe the computer just doesn't have enough RAM to simulate another planet's civilization. This is all to say that maybe if we were able to find aliens, then we'd finally get the answers that we're looking for.
In our number 8 spot today, we have a computer virus in a DNA strand. Before I dive into this one, guys, please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button if you're enjoying the video so far, because it really helps us out. In 2017, a group of researchers from different scientific backgrounds at the University of Washington proved that they were able to put computer code into DNA strands. My brain is honestly unable to even comprehend this, but apparently it's true. The whole goal of the research was to be able to prove that computers that work in gene sequencing were very vulnerable to cyber attack. It seems as though they may have proved a little bit more than what they intended. I'm truthfully
personally not very familiar with DNA strands or computer viruses, so I don't really know what this means, other than the fact that it's entirely possible what we perceive as our biological makeup may really just be some computer code after all. If this is the case, I'm really upset that whoever is controlling our simulation didn't just make us at least a little bit more resilient.
At number 7, experimentation. You know how it seems like the world is always on the brink of absolute chaos? Environmentally, we are always just one wrong move from ending humanity as we know it. Certainly a bit stressful for us, but maybe this is on purpose. It is possible that we may have been created as a simulation in order to help whoever created us figure out their own climate and environmental problems. It would be crazy because if they can make a simulation that feels this real, then surely they can figure out their own problems too, but that might not be necessarily true. If we really are in a simulation, they may have created us to be better at that sort of thing than they are. It is possible that if we solve enough of their problems, then they might just come back to Earth or whatever planet we end up on in order to reap the benefits from our hardworking scientists.
In our number 6 spot today, we have no evidence. This one is actually a little frustrating, to be honest, because it should be so simple. This is just the theory that it is most likely we are living in a simulation due to the fact that we absolutely cannot prove that we aren't. As much as a lot of us would like to believe that we aren't, or maybe it comes down to the fact that we can't let go of our egos enough in order to be able to believe, anything we think or any evidence we think we have would have all been simulated. If we do in fact live in a simulation, it is possible that whoever created it would prefer that we didn't come to the realization that our reality isn't ours at all. I'm not gonna lie, this whole theory is actually kind of frightening because it is most likely that we won't actually ever know the truth.
At number 5, it's all a joke. Sometimes things just happen in our world that are just weird. Who could have predicted that Donald Trump would become president? Or the time that the Patriots were down 28-3 in the Super Bowl and came back to win the whole game? Or that weird Oscars envelope mix-up that was just really, really awkward. Anyway, this is all to say that weird things happen in our world all the time. Some things that no one quite saw coming and quite honestly seem kind of strange. This theory goes that whoever made our simulation may just want to have a little bit of fun. Or maybe our simulation is malfunctioning and they're trying to get us back on track. Either way, this could be an explanation for those weird things that just seem to happen.
In our number 4 spot today, we have the Goldilocks zone. You know how we are located in such a great spot in our solar system? Just far enough from the sun that we don't absolutely burn up, but close enough that the sun helps sustain our life. This is what is commonly referred to as the Goldilocks zone, since it is just right. This lends well into the idea that we live in a simulation because of the fact that whoever created us most likely wants us to be able to survive, so of course they would place us in the most ideal location for life. I would definitely like to ask them why they made the sun so harmful as well, because that seems like an oversight, but I am willing to look past it for now, considering there isn't anything I can do to change that.
At number 3, math is a lie. You know how we have rules, like the laws of physics, or just the scientific and mathematical rules that our world just seems to follow that we had to figure out? Well, some people believe that those laws are proof of us living in a simulation. If we lived in a video game, at some point we would also discover that there are rigid rules that cannot be broken no matter how hard you tried, almost like it is mathematical or scientific. So something like the speed of light, which is the fastest rate a particle can travel in our world, might just be the time it takes to transmit information in our simulation. All of the rules we think we've figured out might just be more proof that we do indeed live in a simulation.
In our number 2 spot today, we have our own simulations. This one has to do with what we are doing that could possibly prove the existence of a simulation. As humans, we are getting better and better at creating our own simulations. In 2014, the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics connected 8,000 computers to create a 350 million light-year simulation of our universe and digitally aged it over 13 billion years. Or, for a more simple example, let's take The Sims. This franchise sold over 125 million copies in its first decade, so it shows that we are absolutely interested in creating our own simulations. If we are this interested in it, why would we assume that whatever other forms of life exist out there aren't also as interested as we are? This one might make you think next time before you decide to delete the ladder to get out of the swimming pool in your Sims world.
And finally, at number 1, we are the simulation. This one is pretty simple, but also might be a little little confusing. We all live in our own reality and no two are the same. Whatever we perceive in the world is slightly simulated by our own brains. What I mean by this is that we use our past and our memories to process information that we are currently receiving, whether we do it consciously or not. Who is to say that anything we see looks the same to anyone else, or anything we taste tastes the same to anyone else? We all live in our own little world, and that in itself might be proof that we are in a simulation. There is no true reality that we share 100%. It is all based on the individual.
In our number 1 spot, we have the bald spots. This photo is crazy. So crazy that it just had to be in first. What are the odds of 5 men with the same bald spot all sitting on the same bus in a seat that is one after the other? How? Something happened in the Matrix that day, clearly, and it created this blip. This is honestly magical to look at. Seeing this just brought the biggest smile to my face and put me in a state of wonder about the mysteries of the world that are yet to be discovered. I hope it did the same for you.
This one gets a little dark, so we'll ease our way in, you know? The twins named Jim. Okay, that sounds like a 2026 comedy hit already. Back in 1979, a set of twins were reunited when they were 39 years old at the time. This was, of course, a big moment in their lives. For 37 years, they barely knew of each other's existence. Then when they finally met, the long-lost twins had more in common than they could have ever thought. For starters, both had been named Jim. I spoiled that in the fun title earlier. But their adoptive parents both named the lads Jim. That's insane. Jim? Like of all names, really? And both Jims just happened to love math and carpentry. Both also had jobs and security. And both also had ex-wives named Linda. And they both since married a woman named Betty. This isn't like, what? Imagine meeting another you, and he's like, oh yeah, I also love knitting and Autobots. What are the odds? No, that's too eerie. You're an alien clone. Something's afoot here. Get out of here. Not just meeting a long-lost twin at 40. No way. Number 9, Stephen Hawking. Time is relative and fascinating and all that confusing stuff. There's so many components of our universe that we still don't even understand. James Webb is out here making people turn to atheists all of a sudden. The universe is bigger than we all think, yet somehow it still gives us these once-in-a-lifetime coincidences. Or as I say, coincidence. Stephen Hawking's death occurred on Einstein's 139th birthday, which is also Galileo's 300th death day, and also Pi Day. This was March 14th. My dad has the same birthday as Daniel Radcliffe, and they're both wizards, so I don't know. Just saying. These birthday coincidences are getting out of hand. Coincidences. There it is, he's got it. Number 8, atomic survivor. On August 6th and 9th, 1945, the United States detonated 2 nuclear explosives over the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This, of course, was devastating. The results in this reaction, the blast and the radiation they both caused, took the lives of nearly 90,000 people. It was horrible. But in 2009, the Japanese government confirms that there was at least 1 man who was in each city on both days of the reactions, and he lived to tell the tale. On August 6th, Satomu Yamaguchi was in Hiroshima on a business trip. As I was walking alone, I heard the sound of a plane. Just one, he told a British newspaper. I looked up into the sky and I saw the B-29 and it dropped 2 parachutes. I was looking up into the sky at them and suddenly it was like a flash of magnesium, a great flash in the sky, and I was blown over just like that. And by August 9th, he had returned home to Nagasaki only to experience the trauma for a second time. Despite the double radiation exposure, Yamaguchi lived to be 93 years old, which is incredible. He sadly passed away from stomach cancer. Number 7, Julianne Kopka. Miss Julianne has a 2-for-1 when it comes to survival stories. I had to include it. Her story starts out on Christmas Eve, a lovely day, 1971, when she was just a teenager and she was on Lanza Flight 508. Now the plane was struck by lightning, which is an actual nightmare situation that I didn't know could happen, and this led to the plane starting to disintegrate midair. It was all bad. In what felt like the blink of an eye for Julianne, she found herself still strapped to her seat 2 miles above the Peruvian rainforest. She was injured, of course, full of bruises, a broken collarbone, but she was alive after she landed. And in fact, she was the only person who had been on the flight that was still alive. Just fell out of a plane and lived to tell. That is crazy. That is bat insane. But it's like you're out of the fire into the frying pan at this point, right? Now you're in the wilderness all alone with no food, just, a little bit of candy, if anything, from the plane. Julianne had found a small stream which she began to wade in downstream. She traveled along it, and the insects in the jungle were eating her alive, and sorry, this next part is gross, but maggots had infected her arm. It was like bad, worse, even worse. Now we're flowing down a river and maggots are eating me. This is incredible. Julianne ended up coming across a sort of encampment where she found a few supplies, and she was so smart and was able to give herself a little bit of first aid, which included pouring gasoline on the infected arm, which then led to all the, disgusting bugs and maggots leaving it. Because they're like, hey, I'm not a fan of gasoline. Lunch is over. See you later. And then just a few hours later, a few lumber workers found her, and they gave her more first aid treatment and took her to an area that was more populated, where she was then airlifted for medical treatment. Now, in 2000, her story was told through the documentary titled Wings of Hope, which was directed by Werner Herzog, who particularly took interest in the story because, one, it's obviously incredible, as I was just explaining it. I read this and I'm like, it's crazy. But two, Werner Herzog also had a seat booked on that flight, and he would have been on that same flight if it wasn't for a last minute change of plans. I can't even, that should be number 1, really. Number 6, Comet family. Okay, this one's good. The odds of being hit or killed by a meteor are 1 in 2 million, or something like that, right? It's crazy. But even so, back in 1954, residents in Talladega County, Alabama, noticed a ball of fire heading towards the Earth. Now, back then we didn't have Twitter, right? We couldn't warn anybody that a meteor was possibly gonna hit us. We also really didn't know if it was gonna hit or not, or how big it was, so it was alarming. Especially for Anne Elizabeth Hodges, who got hit by said space rock. Yeah, she only got grazed, but with these odds, it's still possible. Wild. Now, cut to recent history, the Comet family in France. Their house was hit by a meteor. I'll say that again. The Comet family was hit by a... You get it, there we go. As somebody with the last name McWaters, I'm a little worried that I might drown now. I don't know. Last names seem to be a little bit of a tip-off, it seems. And number 5, World Cup. An episode from The Simpsons back in 1997 called The Cartridge Family shows Mexico and Portugal going head-to-head in football. Like soccer football, not like, football. You get it. Springfield residents are told to go see this match to determine which nation is the greatest on Earth, Mexico or Portugal. So when the 2018 World Cup then rolled around much later, pun intended, fans were excited that this was now coming true, but at the same time had a laugh determining that Ronaldo must have missed that penalty intentionally so that the prediction would come true. That's like the theory now, that Ronaldo missed to make The Simpsons correct. A lot of theories for that one, it's always fun. But recently it's been announced that Qatar will host a tournament in November and December 2022 rather than usual June-July dates. Another World Cup, another chance for The Simpsons to add another prediction to their already impressive list. That's a creepy show. I have another Simpsons one coming up, but we'll see. Number 4, Mars life. We're back. There it is. There's the next Simpson one. That fast. There we go. Let me ask you lovely people a question. If you could go to Mars right now with like 3 of your friends, would you do it? Keep in mind it's really boring, and unless you're an astronaut botanist like Matt Damon, you'll probably have a rough go. But in the future, would you do it? I would. I'd go. I'd go with like 1 person, 4's too many, that's too much. Going to Mars might be as simple as going to the mall. Apparently, The Simpsons have an episode where they show a family visit to the big red planet come 2051. But honestly, I feel like we're gonna get there a lot sooner. SpaceX is already planning to send people out there. It's a quick, 9-month trip, so make sure your phone's charged. But it's actually more beneficial for the team to travel during these peak times in the 2030s and in the 2050s. Because during these years, trips to the planet will be shorter and they'll coincide with periods of the solar maximum. So while this one may or may not come true in 2022, well, let me tell you, it's right around the corner. Or maybe in 2050. Who knows? Number 3, Titanic inspection card. This inspection card once belonged to a woman named Marion Meanwell. And you're probably thinking, what could possibly be worrisome or, creepy about an inspection card? Well, it shows how Marion was not intended to be on the Titanic that fateful day, but by some turn of events, she unfortunately found herself as one of the passengers. The card shows that she was originally meant to be traveling on a ship called the Majestic, and for some reason the trip she originally had planned was delayed, and now she instead was assigned to the ill-fated Titanic. The eerie part is you can see the word Majestic was crossed out on her card, which then shows us the change in plans. If only people were able to see what was about to strike and they could have somehow warned her. That's the creepy thing about these coincidences. Sometimes they're just bad, You could fall out of a plane and have maggots all over you and survive, or you could go from one cursed ship to another. Number 2, Edgar Allan Poe. Okay, this is a story that actually convinced me that Edgar Allan Poe is for real a time traveler, so buckle up, grab a soda. Because 2 separate stories that he wrote both turned out to be exceptionally true and real, but not until after they'd been written. Yeah, it's a good one. Firstly, Poe's only completed novel was published in 1838, and it tells the tale of mutiny on a whaling ship lost at sea. These men on a ship realize that they're doomed and need to resort to extreme measures in order to stay alive. So they begin drawing straws to see who they're going to sacrifice to save food. A boy named Richard Parker drew the shortest straw and therefore became the next meal. Dark, let's move on. Let's fast forward to 46 years now to 1884, and in real life also, I might add. There are now 4 men who have been set adrift after the sinking of a yacht. These men found themselves in a similar predicament to the novels, and I kid you not, they ended up taking the same route and elected to sacrifice a cabin boy. A cabin boy also named Richard Parker. Odd, right? Okay. Cut to 1840, Poe penned the gruesome story The Businessman, in which the narrator suffers a traumatic head injury in his youth, and then later a violent life follows. The weird thing about this story is that Edgar Allan Poe fully understood, or so it seemed, frontal lobe injury. Now this was long before it was ever even studied or looked at, right? This type of study didn't arrive until 1848. An actual neurologist, Eric Altschuler, recently wrote how there's a dozen symptoms and he knew every single one. It's so exact and it's so weird, it's like he had a time machine. End quote. Yeah, it's almost like he had a time machine. Did he? And finally, number 1, Simpsons dome in real life. Yep, this one's gonna hit home. Let's do it. This one's gonna hit dome. That didn't work. For this one, we're looking at the Simpsons movie, which still holds up. That's a fun time. But even over the pandemic, I saw personal domes come to life, right? It was so weird. Restaurants were making these like weird tents on sidewalks just to stay in business. But an even bigger idea came long before this. Back in the 70s, there were talks about putting a dome over Manhattan, this massive dome over Midtown that regulates weather and pollution, all that good stuff. Now, if that had been built, imagine what we would have done with it during the initial breakout during this pandemic. It would have been madness. And then in 2010, later on, the city called Eco City 2020 was planned out. It was supposed to be built in Siberia. It was announced in 2014 officially, this climate controlled, domed city, 4.5 square kilometers, all that good stuff. But since 2016, the project lost the funding. What do you guys think? Should we bring back domes and just, have a little personal bubble everywhere we go? Just lose the umbrella and live in a big glass ball forever over our city? I'd do it, that'd be kind of nice. Be like living in a Coca-Cola mist zone your entire life, just kind of like, ooh, this is nice.
This theory has some holes, but it is still very interesting, so it was a perfect way to start out this list. We live in a universe that spans an unfathomable distance and has so many planets in them, you couldn't count them even if you were really good at counting. So, some of them are much older than ours, so that means that their life would be way more advanced. So why on earth have we never heard of any of these aliens? Why have they not come out of the stars to see us? Well, this could be because we have a government that is hiding them from us, or it could be because we are in a simulated world and there's no benefit to simulating life on other planets. That could mean that the processing power and whatever we're hooked up to just isn't strong enough. We need to get a rig that is way better if we want some alien life to come in. We've got to invest in a new graphics card and stuff. At number 9, we have the Mandela effect. You might have heard of this. This is where people misremember something from the past. Now, people misremembering things happens all the time. What's the big deal? But the Mandela effect is literally thousands of people remembering it a different way. It's called the Mandela effect because there are thousands of people, maybe even millions, who remember Nelson Mandela dying in the 80s. But he didn't die in the 80s. This dude lived until he was an old man. Or am I remembering it wrong? Are the other people right? The reason why this could be proof of a simulation is because these slight mistakes could show some sort of human error or a glitch in the system on the side of the people who are running the simulation. Someone sat down on the wrong button and was like, oh, I killed Nelson Mandela. I'm gonna get written up for this for sure. God damn, that wasn't supposed to happen. At number 8, we have deja vu. If you haven't seen The Matrix, then what are you doing with your life? It's not only one of the most amazing movies that showcases what could happen if AI gets out of control, but it also is one of the greatest action movies of all time. And there's a 4th one coming, so you need to catch up on everything. Now, The Matrix was one of the first movies to showcase the simulation idea, and evidence of The Matrix or something changing in The Matrix was deja vu. If you saw something repeat itself, it meant that you were in the simulation and that things were about to get crazy. Now, how does this translate to the real world? What if The Matrix wasn't so much a movie, but it was a message? What if the people outside of the simulation wanted us to figure it out? And see if any people would use the hints laid throughout the movie as a way to actually break free from this digital prison. There could be clues throughout that movie that showcase all the signs of us being in a world of ones and zeros. Either that, I'm starting to look like Charlie from It Was Always Sunny with the strings and paper, and I'm like, eh. At number 7, we have simulation loop. We are already starting to see what is called a simulation loop. We live in a simulated society. Many things we create are larger versions of smaller things. Planes are simulations of birds. Tanks are simulations of beetles. As we create what we think is better versions of what already exists. Now we could be getting close to a loop of creating a world which is more interesting than our own. Virtual reality has started to take the world by storm, and in it we will build worlds that are far more superior to our own. Worlds where people can fly, everyone is rich, you don't get sick, and everyone can res their buddy because they got the ray gun. Now, some people theorize that we have done this before, and we are currently living in a previously created simulation, and we might be headed into another loop in the near future and go into a simulation again. So it's like simulation on simulation, inception, in simulation. Oh, I'm not gonna work on that, I made that word up, I'm sorry. At number 6, we have the double slit experiment. This was an experiment where you take a panel of copper plate with 2 slits in it and then you fire electrons at it to see how the electrons interact on the other side. Do they move through in waves or particles? The first time this experiment was performed, the electrons seemed as though they were moving through in particles. The scientists wanted to see this in action, so they set up a device to observe this. And when the electrons were under observation, they moved in waves. So they did the test again without the observation and they went back to particles, meaning that the electrons would change how they interacted based on whether or not they were being observed. If this was a simulation, much like a video game, the processing power would increase on certain areas when you were looking at them, which would explain how this changed the electron activity. Obviously it's probably a lot smarter explanation than that, but I'm going with the simulation one because I am not smart. At number 5, we have Elon Musk said so. Come on, you can't argue with this dude. He's one of the smartest, richest people around. If anyone knew we were in a simulation, it would be this guy. He probably sees the Matrix all the time. He just doesn't want to freak us out by letting us know that there is a 100% chance we are in a simulation, by letting us know that there's a 100% chance we are in a simulation. Also, if anyone was on the up and up on whether or not we are in a simulation, it would be billionaires. Not because they paid someone to figure it out, but because they clearly have cracked some sort of code and know how the world works and are doing something we don't understand. If you had that kind of knowledge, you would be able to get ahead in the game. But Elon has made the theory of a simulation world so popular, so is he our digital messiah, or is he just a little bit crazy and has a lot of money? At number 4, we have That's Why We Have Ghosts. Now this seems like I'm trying to explain a myth with a crazy explanation, but that is why you guys come here. We want to get a little crazy with our theories because that is way more fun. Just walking around in our own reality, we don't want to do that, jeez. But what if ghosts and hauntings have nothing to do with ghosts, but they are glitchy parts of our own reality? Like a haunted house is just basically Fallout 76. Ghosts are floating around doing the T-pose, freaking everyone out. Demons, werewolves, all that sort of spooky stuff that we've always heard about, myths, monsters, and creatures that could all kill us, that's just DLC that the public didn't like and then they just patched it out. And number 3, we have creative purpose theory. Why do we exist? Some people think it's to serve God, other people think it's just to have fun, other people think there is no purpose at all, that we just live and die to get farted out into the earth and never heard from again. But what if we had a much greater purpose? To create, to make something so smart and so interesting we couldn't bear to compete with it. As we get closer and closer to making AI, it seems that a self-aware, learning, adapting intelligence that has the power of the internet in its mind would be too much for us to compete with. It would be a living god that we made, and we should be pretty proud of ourselves for doing it. But what if that is our purpose? To make a being that is all-knowing and able to move through the universe, consume knowledge, and become even more powerful, all without needing to eat, sleep, procreate, or even take breaks. What if we already did this and now we're living inside this endless machine, and the only reason it keeps us alive in this falsified world is because it wants to keep learning from us? Well, if that's the case, download me some abs because it's almost beach season. At number 2, we have computer viruses for people. DNA is a type of code, much like the code that makes up computers. So could a virus from a computer get into someone's DNA somehow? Most of you probably think that is impossible, but there was a group at the University of Washington who might prove you wrong. Now I want to start off by saying you can't get sick from a computer. The virus that got put into human DNA cannot affect people. Don't freak out. But in 2017 this group found out that you could put malware into a strand of DNA. It was a very interesting experiment, and it might have worked because all of our DNA is actually code, and we are actually made up of ones and zeros and nothing's real. Go rob someone. Don't actually do that. And for our number 1 spot, we have the Fibonacci sequence. This is gonna be some math stuff, so if you guys aren't good at math, don't worry, because I suck at math too, and I had to find a dumbed down explanation so I could understand it, and I'm gonna be bringing you an even dumber version right out of my mouth. The Fibonacci sequence is a series of numbers where the totals equal the numbers before added together. So starting with 0, we have 0 plus 1 equals 1, 1 plus 2 equals 3, 2 plus 3 equals 5, 3 plus 5 equals 8, and so on and so forth, with the sequence looking like 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, 89, 144, and it goes on like that forever. Now, what does this have to do with simulation? Well, this sequence shows up in a lot of math and also a lot of nature. Many plants and other natural forming things have perfect Fibonacci sequences inside of them, almost like they were programmed from a computer. This could just be the most efficient way to make life, and cells are living math, or could we all be in an auto-create version of life, and that's how the world is built in a computer, and it's just like boop, they hit a button and it makes everything.
This person recounted their story of how their school seemed to suddenly change. They started a new school just a few years ago and remember exploring the school for the first time. They have a clear memory of walking up a flight of stairs to get to the 2nd floor, seeing 2 water fountains to the left and the bathrooms to the right. They didn't return there for a while as it was on the opposite end of their classroom and they had no need to go there. The next school year they walked down to that end of the school again and realized that the staircase was nowhere to be found and there was no 2nd floor at all, merely a blank wall remaining where the stairs had been. He wasn't the only one to remember it either, a few of his other friends having memories of the 2nd floor. There was also no record or evidence of the 2nd floor having potentially been demolished in that time, a potential glitch in the matrix putting a staircase where there had never actually been one. Number 9. Tomato soup. This person described their glitch in the matrix, also thinking it possible that they may have fallen into a parallel universe. Him and a close friend were working on a creative project together and they met each week at the same restaurant to go over the progress and discuss their work. The restaurant they always visited had a wall that was lined with jars of Caesar dressing and vodka sauce, knowing that these were the exact things on the wall as they would examine them and even read out the calorie contents. Their father then passed away, and in an attempt to get back to normal, he decided to meet up with the friend at the restaurant again the week after. But when he got there, he realized that the walls were now lined with jars of Caesar dressing and tomato soup instead of vodka sauce. While they could have just swapped them out, he says he asked the staff and they said they had never had vodka sauce on the wall. The person believing that the shock of their father's death caused them to experience a glitch in the matrix. Number 8. Different language. This person shared the fact that they had always been a sleep talker and even a sleepwalker. His family apparently never being able to distinguish whether or not he was awake, as he would always have his eyes open. He tells a story of how he had been close with his freshman roommate in college, him not minding the sleep talking as he would find it amusing to hear what the person had to say. One night he apparently started talking in his sleep about wanting a hamburger, the roommate replying that, well, everything was closed. The person insisted they needed a hamburger now, and the conversation continued like this until he eventually fell back asleep. When he woke up, his roommate said to him, "I didn't know you could speak Spanish." They had apparently had the entire conversation in Spanish, despite the person not actually knowing the language. The roommate had studied Spanish for many years and swears that he was totally fluent. The roommate's girlfriend, who had been on FaceTime that night, even backed him up, saying that she too had heard him speak in Spanish. Number 7. Outside reality. This person was on a trip with his friends floating down Lake Powell, going deeper and deeper into the canyon. He suddenly had a thought cross his head that it was so beautiful it looked fake, like it was specifically designed to be that way. As soon as he thought it, his friend turned to him and said, "Dude, it feels like we're in a movie and we're looking at movie props. It looks so fake." The two mildly freaking out about how they seemed to briefly share a brain cell. A little later on, he said he experienced what he describes as an altered state of consciousness, saying he felt like the facade of the human experience was dropped, and all his friends looked looked like angelic beings enjoying Earth. At the same time, the same friend turned to him and said, "Dude, look at our friends. They're so beautiful and alive, they look like angels." He says he believes they were able to see past the simulation and tap into the true reality. He also clarifies that they were both sober and it wasn't just the trip of a lifetime. Number 6. Zombie. This person who works in the admitting department of their local hospital believes they experienced a glitch where the past changed and somebody came back from the dead. A few years ago, one of their co-workers in another department passed away, him being responsible for processing the co-worker's obituary. The co-worker's daughter was good friends with their cousin, so they saw her at the co-worker's house after the funeral, holding a large ceremony for the mother. Then recently, the co-worker's daughter walked in, saying that her mom was in the ER. The person was obviously confused as they knew that the girl's mother was dead. Due to being so shocked, a co-worker had to step in and look up the girl's mother, showing it to be the woman who died years ago, but she was actually alive and in the hospital. The person not being able to find the obituary that they had processed. When they spoke later, the girl said that other people had also been coming up to her about the situation, saying that they too remember her mother's. Number 3. The moon. This person was driving down the road with his mother when they both experienced the sky glitching. They were driving down a completely straight road to the theater on July 2nd when they were stopped at a red light, looking up and admiring the moon against the sunset. Just a few minutes later, they were going down that same straight road when they looked up again and saw that the moon had moved a significant distance, the mother noticing it as well and even looking scared at the thought. They then arrived at the parking lot and saw that the moon was still in the moved position, the person suddenly feeling the urge to look away. They say that they wanted to stare, but it felt like some sort of force was stopping them from looking. As soon as they felt like they could look again, the moon had suddenly moved back to the original position in just a few seconds. Them and their mother with no idea how to explain what had happened. They looked it up on Twitter and only found one other person saying, "Did the moon just move?" Number 2. The town. This person lives in a very rural area and as a result knows every town and road that's nearby. One day he was going to a different county to look at a lawnmower, another area that he was very familiar with. Well, on the way there, he drove through a town that has never been there before. It went by the same name as a small community that was normally there, but instead of just a few houses, there were now stores, cafes, and streetlights. Confused, he had to pull over and try and figure out what was going on. All the buildings looking brand new and clean, a contrast to the other towns surrounding it. He went into a cafe and asked the girl working there where he was, her responding with the same name of the small community. When he asked when all of it was built, she responded with the 1800s. Confused, he quickly left and continued on to get his lawnmower. And on the way back, all the new buildings and stores were gone again, only the small old community standing in its place. Number 1. Teleportation. This person was driving home from work with their co-worker to the place that they were staying at. They had driven the route a few times already and knew it pretty well. It was about a 7-minute drive and was a straight path until a turn into the hotel. They had made it pretty far and were about a block away, the sign visible at the side of the road. But then suddenly, they weren't. They looked around and saw that they were on a highway about to take an exit ramp 20 minutes away from their destination. Both him and the coworker having experienced the same thing. The time on the clock still reading the same time it had outside the hotel. Ever since then, he says he feels disconnected from life and disoriented, like something is still wrong. A glitch through the simulation potentially making the person realize that everything is not as it seems.